got my COVID-19 vaccination, and here's why. This isn't about gimmicks or sentiment or what commercial I like. This is about facts. COVID-19 vaccines are safe and effective. Millions of doses have already been given in the United States, and these vaccines have the most intensive safety monitoring in U.S. history. People from different races, ages, genders, and ethnicities participated in large clinical trials around the world to make sure this vaccine worked for all kinds of people. The amount of time and effort dedicated to developing these vaccines was huge. Scientists used existing research and technology so they could get the vaccines developed quickly and safely without skipping any steps. If you need any more information, use a reliable source like the CDC website to get the facts.
I'm getting vaccinated against COVID-19. Yes, there could be some short-term side effects from the vaccine, but they go away in a day or two. Those are signs that my body's building protection. It's worth it to avoid serious problems from COVID-19 disease.
I got my COVID-19 vaccination, and here's why. This isn't about gimmicks or sentiment or what commercial I like. This is about facts. COVID-19 vaccines are safe and effective. Millions of doses have already been given in the United States, and these vaccines have the most intensive safety monitoring in U.S. history. When you need more information, use a reliable source like the CDC website and get the facts.
Good evening. I am Jimmy L. Slade. I'm the Executive Director of the Community Ministry of Prince George's County. Our community ministry is an almost 48-year-old faith-based human services nonprofit organization that is also a community health resource. I'd like to welcome you to tonight's discussion on COVID-19. First, I want to recognize Dr. Phyllis Slade Martin, who is the project director and the person that pulled this all together for tonight. Dr. Phyllis Slade Martin is not related to me. However, we have had the pleasure of working together on multiple projects, and she's headed other cancer research projects that we've conducted in the past, and we've grown to adopt each other as brother and sister. She also leads a team of multidisciplinary community members, also students that range from a high school student through Dr. Nate Woodard tonight, who is a doctoral candidate at the University of Maryland School of Public Health. Tonight, we are delighted to also have as our moderator, Olivia Stanford. Olivia Stanford is a research program coordinator for community outreach and engagement at Johns Hopkins Sidney Kimmel Comprehensive Cancer Center. She helped moderate and run the multi-episode web series, Conversations with the Community, which aims to help educate people on various cancer topics through talks with community members, survivors, and healthcare providers. This program that Dr. Phyllis Slade Martin leads and that our team is implementing, this one-year program, is a CDC Foundation supported effort that is also supported and made possible by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Olivia Stanford and turn the program over to her at this point. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Slade. Good evening, everyone, and thanks so much for tuning in to tonight's discussion, Dispelling the myths and misinformation around COVID-19 and the vaccines. So, since December of 2019, more than 4.5 million lives have been lost around the world. So I can truly say that everyone has felt the impact of this pandemic. However, since the introduction of the vaccines and with everyone doing their part to practice things like social distancing and wearing masks, we are steadily finding our way toward a new normal. Tonight, we want to get the facts straight about old news, like what is COVID and what are the vaccines, and new information that has come out recently, like the booster shots and the Delta variant. To help set the record straight, we have three amazing panelists. Our first panelist is Dr. Irene Aninie. Dr. Aninie is the Director of Science Programs at the Society for Women's Health Research. Prior to joining the SWHR, Dr. Anine worked for the American Association for the Advancement of Science Research Competitiveness Program. Dr. Anine completed her PhD in molecular and integrative physiology at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. As a postdoctoral fellow at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, she expanded her work in endocrinology and metabolism, studying thyroid hormone action in development and reproduction. In addition to research, Dr. Anine had dedicated her career to engaging the scientific community through academic service, outreach, and teaching. With a passion to diversify the field of the face of STEM and increase the involvement of underrepresented groups in the sciences, she serves as a mentor and advisor to students and early career scientists, and she has provided leadership on multiple educational programs, career development, and award review committees at professional societies, universities, and community organizations. Our second panelist this evening is Nathaniel Woodard. As Mr. Slade briefly introduced before, Nate is a graduate research assistant. After studying public health and psychology at the University of Rochester, Nate came down here to the University of Maryland to work in behavioral and community health and to obtain an MPH degree. Nate has since completed the MPH program and transitioned into the doctoral program in behavioral and community health at UMD. He is particularly interested in the motivations behind health behaviors and how person-to-person interactions affect these motivations and behaviors. His current work focuses on health promotion in organizational contexts. Thank you so much, Nate. And our last panelist this evening will be Dr. Lulu Ricks-Santee. Dr. Lulu Ricks-Santee is the director of the Cancer Research Center and associate professor in the Department of Biological Sciences at Hampton University. Dr. Ricks-Santee previously served as an assistant professor at the Howard University School of Medicine, where she led and supervised a team of research assistants and students investigating breast and prostate cancer genomics in ethnically diverse populations. She was a K-12 scholar, a KL scholar in clinical and translational sciences. Dr. Ricks-Santee holds a PhD in tumor biology from Georgetown University and completed a postdoctoral fellowship focused on cancer disparities and genetic epidemiology at Howard University. So before we begin our conversation, we will first watch a short documentary titled Tuskegee Legacy Stories, COVID-19 Vaccine Education Initiative. This documentary is a part of a Howard University campaign to help dispel the concerns that people might have about the COVID-19 vaccine. After this documentary, we will then come back to hear from our panelists.
I had someone tell me that they were concerned about getting the COVID vaccine because of the syphilis study. They didn't even know my grandfather was a part of the study.
Tuskegee is a very sacred place. There's no way you cannot feel history.
Think about the Tuskegee Airmen and all of the greatness that they did, and then to find out that in this same space, such an atrocious study was being heaped upon our men.
The study began in 1932. Segregation and Jim Crow were the structures of how our society functioned. What happened with the men and their families? It was the untreating of syphilis.
The original title of the study is Tuskegee Study of Untreated Syphilis in the Negro Male.
They were not treated for a disease that killed them, that made them blind.
My great-great-grandfather, John Good, he was of the clergy, he was a farmer. He was a syphilitic in the study, and our family really didn't talk about it.
Both of my great-grandfathers had been a part of that study. They were sharecroppers, and then later they were able to get land of their own.
On my right here is Alec Ware, we call him Big Daddy. On my left here is Papa Frank Cooper, and he went blind at a young age.
I am the daughter of one of the men in the study, Freddie Lee Tyson. I'm also the daughter of Johnny Mae Neal Tyson. I have to include my wonderful mother because the two of them was on the journey together.
My uncle used to always run after us. We'll get your ear, I'm gonna get, and we just run and run and run, and then we run right back to him.
My grandfather and I were phenomenally close. He worked as a firefighter where the Tuskegee Airmen trained. Actually caught my first fish with my grandfather.
My father had congenital syphilis from his mother.
There were a number of opportunities for the men to receive treatment, and they were very intentionally barred.
And everyone involved in that study wanted it to go untreated until their death. Their body would then be sent to be autopsied to see the effect.
Around 1947, penicillin became widely accepted and widely used. The doctors of the study prevented the men in the study from getting penicillin.
The first thing those doctors should have done for these gentlemen was to make sure that each and every one was treated.
It was the fall of '72. My brother Wallace read an article about the study. A couple of days later, my father received a phone call indicating that he was in the study.
When he found out what the study was really all about and that he had been used and treated as a guinea pig, there was just a lot of shame. I'm so sorry.
In comparing what's happening today with COVID with what happened back in '32, I see more of a contrast than a similarity.
A lot of misinformation is out there that is causing people to think twice or to hesitate. And one of them is the fact they think the men were injected with syphilis, and they were not.
And they were not injected with the spirochete that causes syphilis.
They were not being treated. That is very different from what's happening with COVID-19. The vaccine is being made available to anyone who wants it.
Too many people are using the study as a way of causing their own selves to deny access to vaccines that would save their lives.
And when we talk about COVID-19, for example, we're not talking about the non-treating of Blacks. We're talking about the treating of all people.
The ways in which COVID-19 ravaged Black communities showed that we have underlying vulnerabilities when something like a pandemic hits.
That to me really connects what's happening now with a very important historical legacy. As a result of what happened to these men, it changed the course of American clinical research. It created the institutional review boards, which is a very important intervention that says that there must be people who can examine every study that is done on human beings in this country.
Wherever there's research that's happening, there has to be informed consent documents that are signed, not just when participating in clinical trials, but also if you're going to get any type of a medical procedure. Those things came because of that study.
It boils down to truly understanding the concept of community, which is two words, common unity.
The path from tragedy to triumph travels along the path of learning. I've taken both of my vaccines, and you're talking about something that happened to my family.
We can't do this by ourselves. In order for us to be healthy together, we need to all be vaccinated.
Wow. Wow. What an amazing documentary. So, to start off our conversation, I wanted to ask all of our panelists, after watching the Tuskegee Legacy Stories clip, how do those stories relate to our topic tonight, dispelling myths and misinformation about COVID-19 and the vaccines? I'll start with Dr. Aninye.
Well, they said it very well in the video. During that study, the issue had to do with the men already had syphilis, and they were looking to identify the disease progression, and did not inform them of what was going on and have that transparency. With COVID, there is definitely more transparency and accountability nowadays as far as the drugs are concerned. Um, Missteps are caught a lot earlier, and there is a lot more accountability for what's going on. So there's definitely that difference between the syphilis study with the men in Tuskegee versus what's going on in COVID today.
Thank you. And and I think that's a really good point to make, just how there is a difference now. And so I wanted to now ask Nate. Nate, what are your thoughts on how the video we just saw relates to dispelling myths and misinformation?
I agree with Dr. Anina. There has certainly been some progress made in this area. They refer to the institutional review boards, which are critical in research and ensure that, nothing like this ever happens again, which is just so important. But, the effects of an event like that, and of the horrible mistreatment of people has deep and long-rooted consequences. And so today we are seeing individuals who don't trust doctors or don't trust medical providers or don't trust research, in large part due to events such as the Tuskegee syphilis study. And so these are things that we're still grappling with today, and something that we have to be cognizant of as we try to overcome this issue of, for instance, vaccine hesitancy. And are the vaccines safe? Can I trust people who say they are safe? Can I trust the CDC, for instance? And so, in summary, kind of long-rooted consequences or deep-rooted consequences of the mistreatment of people historically.
Thank you for that. And you're right, the IRB is something that I think a lot more people, if they knew about it, it would help alleviate some of the stress with studies in general. So thank you for pointing that out again. And now, Dr. Rick Santee. So after watching the clips, how do those stories relate to our topic this evening?
Yes, thank you again for having me this evening. And I agree with both of our speakers. And it's also important to let people know that the Institutional Review Board, what we call the IRB, that community members can also serve on the IRB. So if you're ever interested in knowing the type of studies that engage community members at your local university, there is the opportunity to join the IRB. What mostly resonated with me as far as with the video that we saw is the myth surrounding clinical trials, right? So most people think that clinical trials all involve some type of inoculation or being given a drug or being given something. And what I often like to educate people about is that there's different types of clinical trials. There's observational trials. So this was an observational trial. However, a drug that was being being created or developed at that time was withheld from this particular group of people. But there are drug trials, there are observational trials, there's genetic trials, there are all different types of trials. And in fact, when you take surveys, those are types of research studies that engage you in some sort of way for the data to be analyzed, so there's an actual result or some type of development of a drug or of a tool or of an educational program. So everybody seems to think that when you're involved in a clinical trial, that you're going to be injected with something or you're going to be given a drug. And that's not the only definition of a clinical trial. There are many different types of clinical trials. And I'm part of an observational trial. So I have a genetic eye disorder. And so I'm being observed to understand the progression of my disease. There is nothing out there currently that could cure this disease. So in general, every 6 months I go in and they look at how much vision I still have, and they're trying to determine how long my vision is going to be around. And so I actually consider myself very lucky to be a part of this clinical trial, because in my heart of hearts, I believe that I'm receiving the best care there is. So I was really, what resonated with me was, the definition of clinical trials, and ensuring that people understand that clinical trials are not just drug trials.
No, for sure. And each of you pointed out things, and the fact that all of you mentioned how there are different studies and how the IRB, people from the community can be on the IRB. What? I work at Hopkins and I didn't know that. So I just learned something new. Wow. So that's, I think, the perfect segue into the main part of the conversation. So I wanted to ask each of the panelists again, is there in relation to COVID-19 and the vaccines, is there a particular myth or piece of misinformation that you would like to address? How about, yes, Nate?
Sure. So I'll start. And I think one of the ones that I hear pretty commonly and is a huge hang up for people in my own family, actually, and I've had multiple conversations with them about this, but that is that getting a vaccine, or particularly getting a COVID-19 vaccine, will or can infect you with COVID-19, which is absolutely not the case for COVID-19 and COVID-19 vaccines. In history, vaccines have often been constructed or have utilized weakened or dead forms of virus, and particularly if it was a weakened form, very, very small chances that you could be infected with whatever that illness is, though likely with very little consequences, very few side effects, that sort of thing. But with the COVID-19 vaccines, these vaccines actually do not contain the virus that causes COVID-19 at all. And so there's absolutely no risk that you will get infected from getting vaccinated with a COVID-19 vaccine. And that is just a huge kind of progress in terms of how we protect ourselves against disease. This is a huge, groundbreaking kind of progression that we are all seeing, and perhaps many of us aren't even aware of. It's really kind of a special time, particularly to be around to see this sort of thing. And so, right, sort of in short, the COVID-19 vaccines cannot infect you with COVID-19. And in fact, they do severely reduce your risk of being infected with COVID-19, and of course, reduce the likelihood that you'll have severe symptoms or severe outcomes if you happen to be infected with COVID-19 down the road.
Thank you. So it helps reduce. Okay. So next, how about Dr. Aninye? What about you? What is a piece of myth or a misinformation that you would like to address?
That we hear a lot of, I want to say almost a dissension between, if I'm not comfortable getting it, that I'm an anti-vaxxer, and dismissing the hesitancy that is a very real thing for a lot of people. And so everyone has their reasons and reservations. I'm sure a lot of individuals who watched that video learned something new about the Tuskegee. We all thought we knew what happened in that study. And you ask a lot of people of color, and they'll always refer to it. But does everyone fully understand what's going on? And whether they do or not, it has caused them to respond differently to their public health issues and to COVID and to the vaccines, particularly in this time, because it is a very scary time with not knowing what it is. We have a general acceptance of MMR or of tetanus, but COVID is so many unknowns that it's so important to determine you need the information, and it needs to be trusted information, but it needs to come from a trusted source. And so that's why, like, organizations like this
And forums like this really are good. I'm excited to be a part of it because it's so important to get that information and allow people to be comfortable with whatever they're putting into their body, whether it's a vaccine, whether it's a pill, whatever it is, or what they choose not to put into their body. But it's important to know why and to have the correct information so you're making a decision that's the best for you and not one that's based off of rumors or stories of what I think happened or didn't happen. The interesting piece about even just COVID safety and everything that's going on, is it still real? We still have pockets of people who don't believe that COVID exists or that this vaccine is helpful. But again, I always say we all have doctors. I want to say everybody knows a doctor is somebody in healthcare. Start there with finding out who knows. And not everyone in healthcare can answer your questions, but they can often point you to somebody, and just take the time to find the person who does know or who has studied. If you ask one person, ask another, they'll lead you to a path where you'll be able to get more information and be more comfortable with what's happening, because information from someone you don't trust is just going to go right past you and you're not going to listen to it. So finding someone that you can trust and then making sure that they are knowledgeable in that information is important. And so I think it will definitely help to manage my personal health with the public health needs of my community and being able to marry that together so that we can all stay safe and healthy.
Thank you so much. And I love the point, by the way, that you said trust and knowledgeable, because I work at Hopkins, but I'm only a research program coordinator. So my family members might trust me, but I'm sure not knowledgeable. So thanks for pointing out that. So now for Dr. Rick Santee, the same question for you. So what is a piece of myth or misinformation that you would like to address?
Yes, one of the, as a DNA scientist, people often ask me, so, we're getting vaccinated with, the RNA or the DNA, and it's going to be incorporated in our own DNA, and we're going to have virus in our own DNA, and that's going to make us get COVID, or it's going to increase the mutations in our body that's going to lead to disease. And in fact, yes, it's a little piece of RNA. So, other vaccines, for some other vaccines, they will vaccinate you with the actual virus, what we call an attenuated virus or a dead virus or the piece of the virus. But for this particular vaccine, what they do is infect you not infect you or inoculate you with a little bit of the RNA, which is the code for a particular protein on the outside of the RNA or on the outside of the COVID virus. And then your body can now mount a response to that particular protein. So the vaccine itself doesn't have the full virus. It doesn't have the full RNA or the DNA. It has a little tiny piece, which actually gets expelled within a couple of days from your body. So all that little piece of RNA is supposed to do is to help your body recognize it so that it knows how to fight it. And that RNA does not get incorporated into your body's DNA or RNA. So it doesn't cause any mutations to your body. It doesn't do anything to your body. It's actually spit out within a couple of days. And again, it's just enough time for your body to learn what the COVID is and be able to mount a response to it.
So it's like when I'm setting up like the fingerprint or facial recognition on my smartphone, it's like it has to take, it has to do that initial setup so that then moving forward, it'll recognize this is Olivia and not some random stranger's face. Got it.
Exactly. Yeah, it just creates memory.
Oh, I like the way that is. It's a little imprint for memory. So it doesn't stay in the body. I didn't know that. I wasn't sure how long it remained in the system. So, so for the next question, I wanted to point these two questions to Dr. Aninye, actually. So Dr. Aninye, some people have suggested that fertility may be affected by the vaccine. So is this misinformation? Is this myth? Is this a myth or is this true? And what should people know about it?
Our understanding is evolving, and I work for the Society for Women's Health Research. We were founded on the premise that women were being excluded from clinical trials. I mean, as recent as 20, 30 years ago, because data is a lot cleaner when we're not dealing with hormones and pregnancy and cycles. And so it's like, but by doing that, you miss understanding what this whole population of people need and how medicine will influence them and affect them. And so as the development of the vaccine has progressed and we've learned more, although women that are pregnant or lactating were not a part of clinical trials initially, they have been introduced and we have been able to study the effects of the vaccination on women. And it has not substantiated the initial claims that it's going to affect fertility. The CDC has released official recommendations. The American College for Obstetrician and Gynecologists, which do a lot of clinical guidelines and practices, they also have done their internal reviews and their committees, and they've released their own clinical guidelines for OBGYNs as well. There are some other organizations that have that are neutral to this effort and have done their own studies. They've brought their own experts in, they've analyzed the data that they've accumulated and data across throughout research, and have identified that it is safe for women. As long as you meet the regular eligibility requirements of age and things of that nature, then it is I don't want to say safer, that's not the right word, the effects. So, sometimes some individuals reported, like slight fever, they weren't feeling well afterwards. There's no difference in how it affects women who are pregnant or who are planning to be pregnant. There's no effects on fertility. So it is safe for pregnant women, it's safe for lactating, breastfeeding women, and those who are planning to have future children. There has not been shown to be any effects for fertility for men or women, actually. So it doesn't seem to impact fertility for men.
And thank you for the gender inclusiveness there. I didn't even think, I was just thinking, oh man, what if I want to have kids one day? I've heard people jokingly say, will my baby have a third arm? Please don't say that, please, that's scary. So for you to say for men and women and for people who want to have kids in the future, that's kind of relieving. So thank you for answering that question. You actually answered a couple of my follow-ups too. So I'm going to roll on to our next topic. So I wanted to ask, so we're moving on to something that's a little newer. Recently, we've all heard that as of August 23rd, the FDA recently gave approval for the Pfizer vaccine. So I'm just going to read a very short blurb. I actually have an excerpt here from the FDA's official news release that they posted on August 23rd. So bear with me, everyone. I promise I won't be long-winded. But basically it says this. The Pfizer vaccine has been, Today, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration approved the first COVID-19 vaccine. The vaccine has been known as the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine and will now be marketed as Comirnaty for the prevention of COVID-19 disease in individuals 16 years of age and older. The vaccine also continues to be available under emergency use authorization, including for individuals 12 through 15 years of age, and for the administration of a third dose in certain immunocompromised individuals. Woo, what a breath. So a few questions came from that, and I'll offer this to all of our panelists again. So the first thing that stuck out to me was, what should we know about vaccine booster shots? The news has loved those keywords, booster shots, a third shot.
So, booster shots are often given because the virus may change. And so The reason that we do flu shots every year is because the flu changes often. And so the flu shot that you get, while it's not a booster shot, what it's supposed to do is be able to help your body recognize these new versions of the flu. And so a booster shot works similarly. And what it's doing is, again, priming your body and teaching your body and preparing your body for seeing maybe potentially a different version, so that your body is able to fight it. And as you can see, you know, we have the Delta variant, there's a Lambda variant, there's these variants. So the COVID-19 virus has a high mutation rate, and so it changes often. And so it's going to be important to be able to fight off these different type of variants. So the booster is supposed to boost your immune system so it's primed and ready to fight these different types of viruses.
Thank you. Ooh, here's a follow-up question. Can the vaccine be taken if you think you're going to get sick from COVID? If you think you are getting sick from COVID?
No, you should not take the vaccine if you currently have COVID. You actually are supposed to wait to take the vaccine if you have been exposed to COVID or think you're having symptoms of COVID. And in regards to the emergency use authorization, so the reason that emergency use authorization was authorized is because we were in a pandemic. And so when we are trying to prevent a pandemic, there are certain guidelines that or certain tracks that one can go down. You can go through full FDA approval, which requires rigor and reproducibility in clinical trials. But with the emergency authorization, or the EUA, emergency use authorization, what we were able to do is use data from a previous SARS clinical trial, RNA vaccine clinical trials, kind of put that information together and say, look, we think this is going to work because it's worked before in this particular situation. And so we figured out what this RNA virus, what the code for this RNA virus, and we can use the same exact technique that we use for SARS and MERS to vaccinate against the SARS-CoV-2 virus, which is the COVID-19. And so it was granted emergency use authorization so we could actually give the vaccine. But for the last, year, 18 months, the FDA has been able to actually review all of the data that have come from those clinical trials and was able to show that the benefits of vaccination far outweighed the risks associated with vaccination, and therefore approved the vaccine. And so it was more beneficial than causing harm. FDA approval can take years and years, and you've heard about things getting stuck behind red tape and the bureaucracy, and we didn't want to. The EUA prevented that from happening because there were people all over the world that were dying from it. So because of the pandemic, and if there's ever any type of future pandemic, the government has the authority to approve something for emergency use to try to mitigate the pandemic.
And to kind of follow up to that, there's still a rigor, there's a level of rigor that is still conducted and done. So it's not that it's skipped, but I think one of the key things that she said I didn't want us to gloss over is there's a lot of gaps, because you have to imagine the hundreds and hundreds of drugs and trials that they have to go through, all the data that when I submit, it may take months to a couple years for them to get through everything. But this was basically a bypass. And so that's why it seemed like, why is it so fast? Because instead of it getting approved here and then going to another office and standing in line there, going to another desk and standing in line there, it was as soon as it hit, we're working on it, we're reviewing it because of the nature of the pandemic.
Yes, and even drugs that are under EUA are still undergoing the clinical trials. They're still being monitored. So even past FDA approval, these drugs are monitored. If there's anything, any type of side effect, any new side effect that comes about, all of that is being tracked by the FDA, by the university, by the company. And these side effects and anything that occurs has to be reported, because the FDA makes decisions on a yearly basis based on this data. So it's not something that gets approved and then that's it. There is continuous data that is being collected and analyzed to ensure the safety of these drugs and vaccines.
Yes, and this was actually something that we saw with the pause on the Johnson & Johnson vaccine was, continual monitoring of the safety of these vaccines. And kind of at the first hint that the Johnson & Johnson vaccine may not have been quite as safe as we expected or had thought it was up to that point, they put a pause on that to be sure that we were minimizing the number of people who could be affected by that. And of course, after kind of further review of the data, sort of the cases that they saw of individuals who had some more severe adverse events from the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, those were kind of very particular cases, we'll say, and also very few. And so that's why they decided to sort of reinstate that and to open that back up as well.
And this happens for all drug vaccine trials. This is the process, and you're seeing the process live and in real time. Usually these clinical trials kind of take place behind the scenes. And so everyone here, the whole world is watching this unfold right in front of their eye, right in front of them. And so those are clinical trials for you.
Thanks all of you. And I mean, seriously, thank you for bringing up the Johnson & Johnson one again, Nate, because I remember I was helping to volunteer to register people in our local market for their vaccines in Baltimore City. And I remember just hearing Johnson & Johnson, Johnson & Johnson, Johnson & Johnson don't get it. It was like the boogeyman of the vaccine. So to know that that is a natural part of the process for them, they're watching it constantly, even though there's a lot going on. So that is relieving. That is relieving. I actually wanted to ask you, Nate, just what are the key points everyone should know about COVID-19 and the vaccine in general?
Sure. So I think the most important thing that I would say about COVID-19, coming from kind of a community-based perspective in working with communities, talking to people, the most important thing that I try to communicate to people is that it is preventable and there are things that we can do about it. And so that being, the masking, and we've heard all about that over the past, I guess it's almost been 2 years now, as well as washing hands. And, we should have been doing that all along, but hopefully people are a bit more conscious of that now, among these other methods of prevention and reducing our risk, as well as those trying to protect those around us in the process. So that's, I think, the big thing about COVID-19 that I try to get across to people, is that there are things we can do. And of course, one of those things is to be vaccinated. And that's one of the best ways that we can protect ourselves and protect our communities, our families, our friends from COVID-19. And I think the big thing about the vaccines that I try to communicate, and I mentioned this a bit before, or I suppose alluded to it, and we've touched on it plenty throughout this discussion, but that is the safety and the kind of severe testing, if you will, extensive testing of the vaccines, to be sure that, again, they are safe, that they are effective in reducing our risk of COVID-19, reducing the outcomes if you are in fact infected down the road. So safety, I think, is the big thing that I try to communicate about the vaccines, and then the ability to prevent is what I try to communicate about the virus itself.
Thank you so much. Thank you all of our panelists so far. Y'all have definitely opened my eyes, and I'm sure the audience feels the same way. Well, speaking of, this is now our time to open up the chat, to open up our panelists, bring the audience on into the conversation. So if you have any burning questions that you've had, either some misinformation or maybe some rumors, we would love to take a few questions from the audience, just to see what people are thinking right now.
I will get us started, Olivia, if I may. And that question is about rumors. What would the panelists say when we find that there are supposedly some who are also doctors or also labeling themselves as experts on the vaccine and the virus, and they speak against taking the vaccine, and they do so in with a great deal of authority and a great deal of passion and enthusiasm? What do we say to those that are conveying this information? Or what do we say to our audience about how to deal with this type of information?
I would, if I can say something, might not be the most popular opinion, but everyone has to make the choice that they can live well with. And it's important, as long as people aren't giving opinion, they're giving science-based evidence. So, because there's more than just the science that goes into the decision to be vaccinated. There's personal beliefs, there's everything else that goes on, sometimes even faith-based beliefs and things of that nature. However, in presenting it, whether you are a healthcare worker, public health, a teacher, an employer, I encourage everyone to look at the sources that can give you trusted data and evidence, and use that in making the decision. Because even if you don't personally want to take the vaccine, we should not stand in the way of others who need to make their own decision. And so we give them the information that they need in order to make their decision. And then I personally remind people, there's a public health. When we say it, I know it's just a key term, but it really means something. So my health affects your health, affects the next person's. And one of the things Nate was talking about, I just kept hearing, like, we're treating the pandemic as a fad diet. It's like we're going to do all these things for like 2 or 3 months. And then when it's over, we lift everything back off and we gain all the weight back. And we're back in the situation we were before it happened. And so we have to look at this situation in the pandemic as a lifestyle change, continuing. Even with the vaccine, there is still, Dr. Lulu had talked about, there's different mutations and things. We're seeing it now with the Delta variant. We have to still be cautious in how we behave, our washing our hands, our masks and everything, even if you have the vaccine. So we're still in a pandemic, and we still just need to have patience with how it unfolds so that we make sure that we can all come out with our health as best as possible, and not just thinking one person over another, but how we can come out of this together.
Thank you so much, Dr. Aninye. If it's no problem, I will move on to allow another, to make sure we have time to hear another question or two. I would love to open the floor again. And thank you, Mr. Slade, for asking your question, because I think there were some important points made. Is there another question from an audience member?
Well, this is not a question. This is just a statement. I'm hoping, and maybe because I was a little germ conscious way before this COVID even came about, but I'm hoping that there's certain habits, just like you mentioned, that, people did not walk into the house and wash the outside off of their hands, unless they were working in the garden or something. But washing hands is something that you should do as you enter your home. I think taking off your shoes is important. And I am hoping that we can cut out shaking hands. Your hands, I'm hoping that is the greatest wish from this COVID, is that I no longer have to shake people's hands. I'd rather hug you than shake your hands, because your hands have been all kind of places, right? But I'm hoping that there's some habits that we just maintain. Yes, you should be keeping a certain distance from me anyway. And if you if you see me with a mask on, that means stay away from me. Whether you're vaccinated or not. But there are certain things that we should just do as people in terms of not assuming that somebody else really wants you that close. But that handshaking, I am really hoping we never get back to that again. I never liked shaking hands. So that was a statement. I know it wasn't a question. It's a desire that I have.
That you have. No, I understand. I'm a hugger. So some of my loved ones know I love hugs. So I understand what you mean about that. Thank you so much, Ms. Holloway, for your statement. We're at, now let's see the time, we are at 8:21. So we're going to start winding down this evening. I'd like to, again, just thank you so much to our panelists and thank you to everybody who's watching. But I have one more question for the panelists. I know I've been saying I have a question for you all night, but this one is for each of you. And it's like what do they call it? The speed round, 300 points. So each of the panelists, you have 60 seconds to give a PSA to someone. What do you say to them about dispelling the myths and misinformation about COVID and the vaccines? Let's start with Dr. Aninye. You have 60 seconds. What would you say to someone?
I would say that should have given me like 2 seconds to think about it. Think about your community. I think it's bigger. It's bigger, even when we do other vaccinations, it's bigger than me and my health. It's bigger than me and my loved ones. It's bigger than me and my friends. We are talking about the health and safety and posterity of our larger community. And I think keeping that in mind is really important. And you have to be able to negotiate that. And if anything, be positive and encourage. Whether you want to take it or you don't, I think it's important to listen to people's concerns, whether they're your family, friends, doctors, whoever it is that you're engaging. And you don't have to be a professional. The everyday person, listen to the concerns of the person that you're talking to and have a conversation. Don't try to convince, don't try to prove them wrong. Have a conversation, because that is where we're going to be able to have the impact to really understand and meet the needs of those that we are living with and doing life with. And so if you have a real conversation, I think that's the best way to be able to come out of this healthy and wealthy.
Thank you. I love that focus on the conversation and thinking of the whole community. So thank you for that, Dr. Aninye. Let's see our next participant in the Thunder Round, Dr. Rick Santee. Let's see, if you have 60 seconds, what would your PSA say?
Yes, my PSA would say that we have the tools already at our disposal to mitigate the risks for COVID-19. Wear your masks, keep your distance between people, and get vaccinated. The thing about COVID is that it's not going anywhere. This is not, as was mentioned, a fad diet. This COVID-19 is not going anywhere. Our lives have changed as we know them. And so it's important now, we have the tools at our disposal to use those tools to at least mitigate the risks in such a manner that our communities won't be affected. So wear your masks, keep your distance, and get vaccinated. It's FDA approved, but many people were waiting and would not get vaccinated because it wasn't FDA approved. Well, it's FDA approved now. So it's time to get your vaccines. Thank you.
5 seconds to spare. Nice. And last, Nate, what would your 60-second PSA on the myths and misinformation of COVID-19 be?
Sure. So as to not repeat what the other panelists have said thus far, and they've said a lot of great things the entire time, or at least not repeat what they said in their 60 seconds, because I think what Dr. Anine said about being informed is absolutely critical as we think about misconceptions, misinformation, and myths. So being informed, knowing where your information is coming from, and so being aware that, you know, I heard someone say something on the train, taking that with a grain of salt and going to fact check that information, if you will, particularly as we think about, you know, modern day era and the fake news. And so again, being very aware of where your information is coming from and making sure you're kind of double checking the information that you're getting with a reliable source, as was touched on before. So for example, the CDC, Centers for Disease Control, or the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA. So as far as myths and misinformation are concerned, get all the information that you can and all the information you need to make the decision that is best for you, and make sure that information that you're getting is sound and reliable information.
Thank you so much. I mean, I really can't, like you said yourself, Nate, I can't thank you, Dr. Anine, and Dr. Rick Santi enough, and just for coming out and sharing the knowledge and having a conversation. Thank you everyone for coming out tonight. I'd also like to thank Rodney Miner, everyone. Mr. and Mrs. Miner were the tech folk, and in the era of technology we live in, they ran the show. So like, thank you so much. I'd also like to thank Sumeda Sharma, Dr. Phyllis Slade Martin, and the CMPGC CDC team. And also, this effort was made possible through a grant from the CDC Foundation with support from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. And to everyone here tonight, we hope that some of your myths were dispelled and your misinformation had their facts straight. Thank you so much for coming tonight, and we hope that you have a great rest of your evening.
Olivia,
Stay safe.
Olivia, I think we have 3 minutes left. I want Dr. Phyllis Slade Martin to have an opportunity to close us out, please.
Yes.
We
Yes,
have 2
well,
minutes.
thank you. Okay.
Go ahead.
So that means 5 minutes in my language. No, well, listen, thank you all so much for participating. It was just a wonderful conversation. I know I learned a lot, and I just want to give a bravo to all of our panelists, to Olivia Stanford for doing a fantastic job. Let's give her a round of applause for doing a fantastic job moderating. Dr. Lou Rick Santi, Nate Woodard, and Dr. Irene Anine, thank you all. And a big shout out to our tech team, the miners, as I call them. Thank you for coming. And to Mr. Slade and the CDC team. And most importantly, for you, the audience. Thank you for joining us. Let's spread the word so that we can dispel these myths and misinformation. Have a great night. Thank you all.